said you can't be against school choice and be for kids.
That's right. That's right.
That quote right.
That's right. Absolutely. Anything that expands educational opportunities for kids, I'm going to support.
You think a woman has a right to choose? Abortion shouldn't be illegal in general?
I don't think we should legislate against a woman's right to choose. But on issues like partial birth abortion,
there you can legislate. You would ban partial birth abortion.
Yes.
Those late-term, third-term abortions.
Yes.
You ban them.
Yeah.
They had an exception for the life of the mother, but they didn't have an exception for the health of the mother.
Well, you know, you always have to consider medical exceptions to the fact.
The interview you're about to see with show host Berkowitz with Vallas was recorded 13 years ago on December 27, 2009, and discusses for the most of the interview Vallas's core view on how to best expand educational opportunities for students, especially those in school systems failing to perform well. Also discussed as Vallas contemplated then a run for political office was A, would he consider changing his political affiliation from that of a Democrat, and B, Vallas's personal views on abortion as opposed to what abortion legislation might be best for society as a whole. Very small portions of these discussions have made it into sound bites and used by some of Vallas's opponents in political campaign ads. Public Affairs thought our viewers would like to see and hear these comments in the context of the full interview. That seemed fair. We hope you enjoyed the interview and find it helpful as you consider how Chicago can best move forward with its choice on February 28th, 2023.
You're watching Public Affairs. Berkowitz is my name and politics is our game. And we will be doing politics this evening and also public policy because we have as our guest Paul Vallas, who's been in that world of politics and public policy. He started out way back when the Illinois Economic and Fiscal Commission. You didn't start out, but you were the executive director of that commission. 5 years, revenue director for the city of Chicago in the early 90s, budget director for the city of Chicago, 93 to 95. And then really a major change in Paul Vallas's life. We'll talk about that because he became superintendent and the CEO of the Chicago Public Schools for the next 6 years, 95 to 2001. And then he ran for governor in the Democratic primary in Illinois and a three-person race. I remember that, 2002. Rod Blagojevich, a name that's become a bit of a household name, even around the country. Rod Blagojevich, Roland Burris, and Paul Vallas. Paul came in second, a close second. What was it, Blagojevich, 36% of the vote, you about 33?
Yeah,
31 for Burris?
He beat me by 1.5 percentage points.
So, you know, it could have been a very different story here in Illinois. We assume, Paul, if you had been elected governor, you probably wouldn't have been arrested and then indicted and awaiting trial. Would that be safe to say?
Yes, it's safe to say. Well, let me point out that when I left, I retired my entire campaign debt out of pocket without having additional fundraisers or at least preparing to run for an additional office so I could continue to do fundraising. So I think that's indicative of the approach I would have taken to fundraising, what ultimately got Rod into so much trouble.
You don't think you'd be standing out there and collecting $50,000 checks as people were coming in to the Art Institute or the Field Museum?
I don't think so.
You don't think you'd be calling up somebody, as is alleged of the former governor, calling up somebody, the head of Children's Memorial Hospital, saying, you know, you're trying to get, or your brother might, to get a contribution because you were going to sign something and you would withhold signing that until you got the dough?
Probably not.
You don't think so?
No, I don't think so.
You don't think you might have been, if you had the opportunity to appoint somebody for the U.S. Senate to replace Barack Obama, you think you would have said, this is golden. Well, we can't say it, you know, this is blank, blank, blank golden, right? And just that the power you'd have, the prize, would you be thinking about what do you get and what could you get? Could you get a big job somewhere if you appointed somebody to the Senate?
I probably would have called for a special election.
Yeah.
I think that's the fairest way to do it.
Okay, so folks, it could have been very different. It was different for Paul Vallas because he went to head up the Philadelphia School District for 5 years. 450,000 students?
No, 225,000.
It was about 400,000 here in Chicago, about 250. So,
yes,
but still a substantial size. You would say major success in 5 years at the Philadelphia school system?
Test score improvements, 6 consecutive years. Biggest increases in graduation rates, cited by Education Week in one of the Gates-funded studies that they do periodically. And I'm talking about improvement in graduation rates vis-a-vis the affluent suburbs. So we had a lot of success there.
So now you're at the Recovery School District in Louisiana, which is New Orleans plus.
Yes.
You become a big fan of school choice.
Yes. The older I get, the more school choice.
You weren't supporting school vouchers when you were here in 2002 in the Chicago Public Schools. 2001, were you?
In 1996, I was on a panel with Arlene Ackerman and Rudy Crew, and we were asked about the school choice question. I was asked a voucher question, and I basically said I did not oppose vouchers. Never have, never will. I think I've become more of an aggressive advocate. So it's gone from not being opposed to vouchers to being a strong supporter of anything that expands educational opportunities for children who would not otherwise have those opportunities.
I think you once said to me, and I could be wrong, we talked about this back in 2001 when you were running for governor. I think you once said to me, Jeff, you can be a reformer and still not be for school choice.
No, I don't.
You wouldn't say that?
No.
Do you think you might have said you can be a reformer and still not be for school vouchers?
I think what I've said on the voucher issue is that vouchers aren't going to solve the problem. So, if people are looking for vouchers as kind of a simple way of correcting the ills that befall public education.
Would you say it's a necessary but not sufficient condition to have school choice to reform schools in large, especially in the inner cities?
Well, look, let me preface my remarks by saying I support vouchers. And I support a voucher program that's not limited or that's not targeted. But by the same token, I think there are different ways of expanding school choice, also charters. In Philadelphia, a third of our schools, when I left, were either run by charter providers or private managers. And of course, in New Orleans, 2/3 of the children who are educated in schools in New Orleans are being educated in charter schools. And of course, the city actually has a voucher program for primary grade kids.
But so what percentage roughly of the kids in New Orleans are being educated in charter schools, roughly?
Roughly about 60, about 2/3.
About 2/3, 60% or more.
Yes.
And the number of kids who are attending voucher schools would be roughly how much?
I would say the number of my kids in the recovery school district attending, I would say about 5-6%.
Okay, so it's small, but you have said you can't be against school choice and be for kids.
That's right. That's
I
right.
got that quote right.
That's right. Absolutely. Anything that expands educational opportunities for kids, I'm going to support. And well, when I was in Chicago, I remember offering the cardinal a charter for every financially failing Catholic school. So as an alternative to closing those schools, simply apply for charter status. You could have had school prayer, you could have had religious-related activities as long as they were structured so that they were after-school voluntary activities. You could have had about 90% of the existing school retained in terms of programmatic retention, but the Archdiocese preferred to close the schools as opposed to taking advantage of my charter offer. As you know, Washington, D.C., the Archdiocese has actually supported the creation of, or the conversion of certain Catholic schools to charters in order to keep them open.
Why did they choose to close the schools? What explanation? Who was it who made that choice, the decision?
Cardinal Francis George.
And why would Cardinal George turn you down on that?
The argument was the absence of religious immersion.
So it couldn't just be after
That's
the
right.
school.
Yeah, the feeling was it would really cease to be a Catholic school if those activities were extended day activities and activities that were optional. But my position was to allow the local parishes to make that determination, because in effect you could have kept 10, 15, 20, 25 schools open. I went to Catholic school, public school, suburban school, inner city school, and fundamentally you could have retained 90% of the character and programmatic concepts that are
when was that decision made roughly?
That was in the 90s, and when I went to Philadelphia, same thing. I
think it would be constitutional to do what Cardinal George wanted. The June 27, 2002 Supreme Court decision. Can't remember now. Is it Simmons? One of the Supreme Court case basically said vouchers are constitutional, even if the kids go to a private school or a parochial school, as long as they control the funds. Isn't that what the Supreme Court said? I think it did. So right now, I think Cardinal George would not have to give that up.
Well,
you could have offered him a charter school, and you could have said you could have religion during the day as long as we are giving vouchers to kids. Actually, not a charter school. You would have to do it to be consistent. You would have to give kids vouchers, because under a charter, those kids aren't making the decision. The school district, in a sense, is giving money to the archdiocese. But I think the Supreme Court decision in 2002 basically said if you give money to the parents, there's still a separation of church and state, because the state is not funding the parochial school.
Right.
The parents are choosing to send their kids to the school.
Well,
see that distinction?
I try not to practice law without a license, but I've always felt.
And I'm not practicing law myself.
No. But what I'm saying is, I've always felt that vouchers were constitutional. Okay. Give or take some of these local decisions.
So you could, right now, the important thing is you could be doing the same thing. Are you doing that with parochial schools that are closing in New Orleans? Are you saying, folks, you don't have to close. We can give kids vouchers, and if they choose to go there, which they very likely might, we can keep it open. You can immerse as much as you want, and life goes on.
Well,
are you giving them that choice?
Well, the problem with the public school, or the problem with the voucher program in New Orleans, is it is limited by state statute. So,
to a certain percentage,
that's
or a certain number?
Well, it's limited to Recovery School District children and those children alone. So if you're already attending parochial schools, you cannot apply for the voucher.
Unless the legislature changes it.
That's right. You have to be a public school student moving from public school to parochial school.
But ultimately, you're...
But ultimately, if the legislature wanted to have
the governor's there, Bobby Jindal.
Yeah.
Ultimately, you report to Bobby Jindal.
Yeah.
Not directly, but indirectly, right?
I report to the state superintendent.
And the superintendent reports to Bobby Jindal?
He actually reports to the Bessie board. And the governor has 3 appointees to the board, but
do you
he
have
doesn't have
a chance to
control.
talk to the governor?
Yeah.
And could you talk to the governor and Governor Jindal and say, if you can get the legislature to change this, you could have more choice, you could improve
it
the
was
schools?
very difficult.
Have you ever said that to the governor?
I have basically said publicly that I would like to see the voucher program expanded so children who attend existing parochial schools are able to apply.
You have said that?
For the voucher. Yeah,
not to the governor directly? But...
I've said that to the legislature when I've been asked to state my position on vouchers.
I mean, when you left Chicago, charter schools probably were only 3 or 4%, maybe even less.
Yeah,
we have
15 charter schools.
And right now I think they're 7%. Mm-hmm. That's not a lot out of 400,000 students.
No.
Why so few?
I think the state has capped charter schools at the local level.
So is it Daley not being able to get his will because he can't persuade the state legislature?
Yeah, I think it's the legislature attempting to.
That would be the teachers' unions?
Yeah, well, teachers' unions.
Well, the teachers' unions basically control the state legislature on that issue, don't they?
Well, I think the unions in general resist charters, just not the teachers' unions alone. And I think
unions in general, not just the teachers.
Yeah, and I think many of the administrators, because the unions, the teachers' unions, are not the only unions that have a presence in public schools in the state. Plus, I think there are many superintendents that do not want to see a proliferation of vouchers, particularly vouchers that are approved independent of their districts, because obviously it does result in a shift of money, even though the money's
there is one superintendent, as you know, who does want to see more charter schools and vouchers, right?
And who was that?
And that would be Michelle Ray, right, in D.C.
Oh, yeah. She
would be the fellow reformer.
Well, yes, I do.
Do you think, am I right? Does she want to see more charter schools?
She does.
More vouchers?
She wants to see more charter schools, more vouchers. She wants to see pay for performance.
Right.
She wants to see more alternatively certified teachers, all things that I support.
And so, Barack Obama in 2002 sat in where you're sitting, on public affairs. June 27, 2002. I
saw him. You showed me the tape.
Yeah, but it was the date of that Supreme Court decision, kind of one of the ironies of life. He didn't know he was going to be president, but he said at that time, I would support anything that is going to be better for the children of Illinois, including school vouchers. He didn't throw in that phrase, but I said, including school vouchers, and he said, everything has to be on the table. Barack Obama is remarkable for giving anybody what they want to hear when they ask a question. So he might have thought, I wanted to hear that. I do proselytize a little bit for that. And so he said, everything is on the table. And I'm reading that to be school vouchers. Because I asked him, school vouchers. So I would support anything that's going to be better for the children of Illinois. He becomes president of the United States. Before then, in 2003, when he's running for the Senate, he says, I am not for school vouchers, Jeff. I am for charter schools. What happened to change Barack Obama's mind from June 2002 to July of 2003?
You'd have to ask him.
He became a serious candidate for the U.S. Senate, and he realized in the Democratic primary, nobody can win that race as a serious candidate if they're going to oppose the teachers' unions and support school vouchers.
Well, you know,
I mean, that's a fair reading of that, right?
You know,
I'm not denigrating Barack Obama. He's a good politician.
All candidates, when they enter those primaries, that, you know, sometimes they undergo a metamorphosis. Sometimes they make adjustments, and sometimes they make compromises in order to get elected.
Accommodate. Would that be the word? Barack Obama?
Call it compromises. Well,
he's an accommodator.
Who doesn't accommodate when they?
I'm not saying you denigrate.
There are some few exceptions. I like to think that
You would not accommodate during an election?
Look, I held my same position on school choice during the election that I kind of staked out before the election in front of an American
2002?
Federation. Yeah.
You went to the union and said you're for school vouchers?
I said that I would not oppose vouchers.
But you didn't say you were for vouchers.
If you remember, I said I went from being...
An evolution. Now you're in
right.
favor of school vouchers.
That's right.
You weren't changing your views then. Your views hadn't changed.
No. When I ran in 2002, I staked out my position as not one opposing school choice and not one opposing vouchers. If you remember, when Mike Madigan actually tried to create a program to provide a per-pupil funding level for the parochial schools to keep many of those schools open, I was the only superintendent in the state to support that. And I supported it from my perch as superintendent. And
to do what? Mike Madigan to do what?
They actually were going to create they were going to amend the formula to allow for a direct subsidy to the parochial schools in order to keep the parochial schools open. I think I was the only superintendent who supported that. I don't remember. I was superintendent.
You were superintendent.
It might have been
early on in the superintendent.
Yeah, it might have been 97, 98.
Okay.
If you remember, they were facing the prospect of closing anywhere from 40 to 50 schools, so they were going to provide them with a direct subsidy.
But it didn't happen.
So
the legislature didn't go along with it.
I believe. I don't know if it passed the House and failed in the Senate, but obviously the speaker pushed the initiative. At about the time, I offered the Cardinal an opportunity to convert schools to charters.
Now let's scroll forward to the current Obama's 2009 education program. He has something called Race to the Top.
Yeah.
Some people might say cash for clunkers. I mean, he's going to spill out, what is it, $4.5 billion?
It's about...
He's already spilled out $100 billion of the stimulus for the schools, right?
Well, he's in...
What did we get, Paul? What did we get? Did you get additional reform in New Orleans because you got money? Or did you just get money and no reform, and you were doing reform? What did we get in Chicago? What did we get in Detroit? What did we get in Cleveland?
Most districts, well, in Louisiana, I can only speak insofar as Louisiana is concerned, we actually didn't get much in the stimulus package, in part because the formula that they used to disperse the money used the 2007 census. And, of course, in 2007 was shortly after the hurricane. There weren't too many kids. So I think we got about $250 per student. But on the average, we got about $25 per student.
Well, in 2007, but I'm not talking the stimulus.
No, but what I'm saying is
$100 billion
of the stimulus.
You didn't get too
much.
We
in New Orleans, we got about $30 a kid. Okay. On the average, though, in Louisiana, and this was probably comparable to other states, they got about $1,300 per pupil, and that's probably similar to what they got in Illinois.
I had a lot of teachers who would have been laid off weren't laid off. This basically was a sop to the teachers' unions. The stimulus program was a sop to various groups, and the $100 billion was a sop to teachers' unions, and they said, we're not going to lay you off.
Well, I think the argument here was...
it was just write a check. He could have written a check and signed to Barack Obama, and it just goes right to the teachers.
Let's explain both sides. On the one hand, if you're an Obama critic, you'll say this is a sop to the unions, this is a payoff, whatever. On the other hand, one can argue that what he was trying to do was to provide local governments with kind of a revenue boost at a time when there was a significant downturn in revenues.
Only public sector employees. Only public sector employees. No private sector employees. They didn't get anything. I'm accused of being an Obama lover. Right. I mean, I think the guy is a remarkable talent.
But let me point.
I'm just saying, if you're fair, you have to point out most of the economic stimulus was a public sector union sop.
Well, look, if you're asking whether or not I was a fan or a proponent of the stimulus, the argument is no.
Okay.
We received very little from the stimulus. If you're asking me if I would have done things differently in order to stimulate the economy, the answer would have been yes.
And what would you have done differently while we're on that?
Well, what I would have done is I would have cut taxes across the board. I mean, if you're really going to
cut tax rates, income tax rates,
because if you're
a supply sider.
Look.
Are you a supply sider?
I'm a supply sider.
Cut tax rates, stimulate growth.
If the objective...
Cut capital gains rates, stimulate growth.
Let me explain. Well...
Right?
Yeah.
You agree with that?
When Clinton cut the capital gains tax, that helped stimulate the economic expansion. That occurred during his administration. Let me point out that if the objective here is to get people consuming, then if you cut their effective tax rates, if you cut their payroll tax.
Consuming, it's work, save, and invest.
Well, work, save, and invest, and consume. The bottom line is if people know...
there's a difference between work, save, and invest and consuming.
All right, but let me explain.
You sound like a Keynesian.
If people believe that they're going to have more money in their pocket permanently, they may be more inclined to go out and spend that money. The same thing on the investment side. I mean, if you want to get businesses to invest, cut their tax rates.
Side. That's demand side.
In other words, don't punish them.
Paul,
don't punish them for making profits.
Paul, you're articulating traditional demand side Keynesian economics.
Well, if we all embrace the same solution, which is tax cuts, what's the difference?
Well, because sometimes if you start from the theory that you're trying to be supply side, you're trying to give people a greater incentive to work, to save and invest.
Yeah, well, that's exactly
that'll
what I'm
lead you
saying.
to the same thing.
But if ultimately the economy is going to be driven by new investment and by consumption, then I say the most effective way to stimulate new investment and to stimulate consumption is to reduce the effective tax rates.
Okay.
So we accomplish the same thing. We agree with the solution. You're just questioning my motive.
So back to education. I'm not questioning. I've never questioned.
I'm not saying that in a negative sense.
Paul Vallas, we are so happy that you're here. And look, this guy is a very hardworking guy. He commutes between New Orleans and Chicago to see his family. He's taken time out of that, I know, that sacred time when you have to spend with your family to come up from the city, from farther than the city, to spend time with us where we tape and scope.
Although, in fairness, my sister lives in Evanston, so I'm killing two birds with one stone.
So we are so happy that your sister lives in Evanston. We give you thanks to what's her name? Should we give her a
Marianne Contouris, very active in the
Marianne Contouris
on the school board.
When you were running, I think for governor or something, because I think somehow I met her at a coffee in Winnetka. I think.
Yeah, and she served on the school board for a number of years.
Okay. Yeah, as did I in Winnetka. Yeah.
With Hecky Powell, they did some good work on the school board.
All right, so going back to Race to the Top,
yes,
which is Barack Obama's current program.
Yes.
$4.5 billion. Is it a race to the top or a race to the bottom?
No, I think it's race to the top. If you look at the race to the top application and the requirements, the heaviest weighting in terms of determining which districts are going to receive the money is in the human capital development. And the human capital development is all about recruiting teachers, promoting teachers, rewarding teachers, all based on performance. So it's really a push to get you to invest in human capital just by not just expanding your pool of potential teachers, going beyond the traditional colleges of education through programs like Teach for America, New Teachers Project, Michelle Wee's program out of Washington, but also when it comes to evaluating and assessing teacher performance, using value-added assessment, using things other than tenure and seniority to determine who gets hired, who gets retained. Student performance. It was
supposed to link student performance to teacher evaluation.
And it does.
The Wall Street Journal says they are making compromises, the administration with unions, so they'll no longer encourage linking student progress to teacher evaluations.
I think they're off.
You think so?
Yes, absolutely.
We'll find out in the spring.
I think I think what they did was they backed off a bit by mandating or by giving.
They said, for instance, you can have peer review to evaluate teachers. That's not student performance. What did the Wall Street Journal get wrong there?
I spent an enormous amount of time on this applicant. In fact, we're still working on the applicant. So I will tell you this. On
the what?
On the application. Because, as you know, the deadline, I think, is January 18th.
You're putting in that you deal with your teacher evaluation is based on student performance.
If you don't have a teacher evaluation or assessment that is based on student performance, that does not include value-added assessment, you will not be a recipient of Race to the Top dollars. One of the reasons
You're sure that the Wall Street Journal just got it wrong.
Yeah, well,
You're going to be sending a letter to the editor of the Wall Street Journal.
I think
you're reading that soon.
I think
they got it wrong.
I think the Wall Street Journal is disappointed in that they backed off and they compromised on certain things. For example,
they accommodated.
Well, they require.
There's that word, Barack Obama, the accommodator.
They require. Well,
Arnie Duncan, the accommodator.
Well,
the Department of Education.
There's two sides to this. I think the Race to the Top application is actually the most radical attempt to transform the way we recruit personnel and we promote and we assign and we retain, or for that matter, we dismiss individuals that any administration has engaged in. Whether it goes as far as the Wall Street Journal would like it to go. Well,
let me raise the other point that the Journal raises. Race to the Top, they say, no longer discourages states from capping the number of charter schools. You could ban charter schools as long as you have something called innovative schools. Isn't that an accommodation with the teachers' unions?
Well,
is Arnie Duncan accommodating just as his boss, Barack Obama, would say, you know, Arnie, sometimes play politics, be an accommodator.
Well, I think they've made some sacrifices, but let me point out that schools, that states that do embrace charter schools and that do promote school choice and that do establish value-added assessment systems, which hire teachers, promote teachers, reward teachers based on their performance, based on data-driven performance in the classroom, those districts are most likely to get raised to the top dollars as opposed to other districts.
Even if they don't have more charter schools, even if they ban charter schools.
Yeah,
you trust them. You think they're not just getting around charter schools. They're remaining true to the spirit of charter schools. Well,
I think that they will not get as many points as they're getting in districts that have, for example, a intervention arm, that districts that are actually transforming schools, because there are provisions in the application that you require that you take over schools that are failing, that you transform them, and whether they become an innovation school or a charter school, or whether or not you privately contract out for that school to be managed by an outside entity, for-profit or not-for-profit. Those are all things that get you points in the application.
Okay. We're taping this on December 12th, it's 27th, 2009. Your contract goes through June with the Recovery School District?
Yeah, it's kind of a year-to-year contract.
Okay. It goes through the next, but you think it's going to go another year, you're going to up another year, so you'll be there at least through the summer of 2011?
It all depends on Mrs. Vallas, but yeah.
If she agrees, then...
I will not be staying beyond next year. Right. So I'll finish out this year, and then we'll decide.
So someday you were thinking of running for Cook County Board President, in the Republican side.
On the Republican side.
So are you now officially a Republican?
Well, I'll probably register as a Republican.
But you don't register in Illinois,
the next primary.
You don't register.
Well, you have to enter the primary.
You have to take a primary ballot.
Right. You have to take.
You're saying you would take a Republican ballot.
I would take a Republican primary.
You think of yourself as a Republican?
I'm more of a Republican than Democrat now. Okay. But I'm,
if you run again for office, you'd be running as a Republican as opposed to a Democrat.
Yes. If I ran for
public office. What about you? People wonder if you ran for something like governor, which you might.
Yeah.
What about your social issue positions? Because that's a big deal in the Republican primary. Are you a pro-choice kind of guy on abortion?
I'm personally pro-choice.
Okay.
Yeah.
You think that'd be a problem running as a Republican?
It might be, because obviously, people
that means That means you're fine with Roe v. Wade. You think a woman has a right to choose? Abortion shouldn't be illegal in general?
I don't think we should legislate against a woman's right to choose. But on issues like partial birth abortion,
there you can legislate. You would ban partial birth abortion.
Yes.
Those late-term, third-term abortions?
Yes, yeah.
You ban them?
Yeah, I would be opposed.
You would allow exception? In Congress, they banned them. They had an exception for the life of the mother, but they didn't have an exception for the health of the mother.
Well, you always have to consider medical exceptions to the fact. But the bottom line is, fundamentally, I oppose abortion, and I oppose partial birth abortion.
The only exception would be a real health issue. Not
real
like
health issue.
Just a minor stretch.
Yeah.
All right.
And I think those things are reasonable.
We're going to continue to speak as the credits roll. Time went so fast, I wish I had another half an hour. But I very much want to thank Paul Vallas for coming here. Thanks so much, Paul. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Hopefully you'll have me back.
I would love to. Paul, of course, is, as we've said, the superintendent of the Recovery School District in New Orleans. And you think you might be coming back? You might run for governor. You might run for something else.
Yeah, I'll probably look for something else that's broken. That's what I do best.
Like Detroit? Is the Detroit school system broken?
Well, I think the city's broken. So
you look around in the big picture. They've tried vouchers in Milwaukee. They've tried them in Cleveland. They tried them in D.C. Would you say they've been successful in those three areas?
I think they've been. I think in Milwaukee they were successful. I think the voucher program that they unfortunately closed down in Washington was successful.
Washington, D.C.
Yeah. The voucher program in Louisiana.
Arnie Duncan closed that. He said the students are there, can continue, but no new students, even though the evidence was clear that it was improving quality. The kids were better, as Barack Obama put it off. The kids were better off, and yet Barack Obama let Arnie Duncan close that down by not standing up to the legislature. They just closed it down. What do you think?
Well, it's not
seriously. I mean, what do you think?
Well, I support vouchers, so I would not have closed down that program. I probably would have expanded it.
So was President Obama accommodating too much to the unions?
You can draw your own conclusions on that. I would have kept the program open and probably expanded it.
Because it was good for students.
It's because it was good for students. Again, I believe that there are different ways of expanding choice. I think the money should follow the kids, whether it's a voucher, whether it's